Adam, we have a guest today.
That's so exciting because it means that I don't have to talk as much.
Hello and welcome to Revolutions of Our Time, the podcast where we explore protest and revolution, past and present, and try to make sense of it all. I'm Sam, and with me, as always, is Adam, but also with me is our first guest. We have with us today Ike Ndolo. Ike, welcome to our humble podcast. It's an honor and privilege to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm very excited to be here with you guys.
We'll get into why it's exciting for me in a bit, but first...
I'm always excited to be here.
That you are. But first, we have an Independence Day to celebrate. So this episode is set to come out on August 10th, but even if we bump it up in the release calendar, I'd like to recognize August 9th, which is the National Day of Singapore. Could have gone with Ecuador, which was exactly on the 10th, but that's very straightforward. It was a Bolivar revolution. But Singapore was much more unorthodox because the 9th is a re-independence day. Maybe one of the only re-independence days. Who knows? But the original independence from the British was June 3rd, 1959. And then in 1963, the Malaysia Agreement combined parts of Borneo, Malaysia, and Singapore into one country. However, these regions disagreed on basically everything, and the Malaysian government, wary of Singapore's growing financial power, limited trade with the rest of Malaysia and Singapore. So in turn, Singapore blocked trade with the Borneo parts of Malaysia. And long story short, this caused a series of race wars in Singapore between the ethnic Chinese and the Malay people. So on August 9th, 1965, in a vote in the Malaysian parliament, the island city of Singapore was expelled from Malaysia.
Congratulations, I suppose, to our comrades in Singapore.
I mean, it seems to have worked out for both Malaysia and Singapore. But anyway, happy Re-Independence Day, Singapore.
Happy Re-Independence Day.
Now, an introduction to our guest, Ike. Ike is a Catholic worship music leader who was really at the forefront of the Catholic Church's revitalization efforts to win over the hearts and minds of the youth. This initiative was started towards the end of the Pope John Paul II papacy and became widespread in American Catholic churches in the early 2000s. And one way to draw younger crowds in and connect the church to the modern world was through music. And in comes people like Ike, who leads crowds in worship through concert-style music. And as I mentioned on our Why the Left preseason episode, I was very into the ministry space when I was in high school. And I actually first saw Ike in person in 2012 when he was the worship leader at a conference called Steubenville in San Diego. So I was amongst, 6,000 to 10,000 teens in the crowd as he was up there on the stage. And the reason we felt that Ike would be a perfect guest on this show is because while Adam and I kind of talk a big game and have had our fair share of tear gas, police encounters, etc. In my eyes, Ike is really living a life in protest, more so than I am, at least. And we'll get into this in our conversation, but as right-wing populism engulfed America, particularly in church circles, Ike really spoke out against this. And since then, Ike has continued to be a voice speaking against injustice and using his platform against inequality, both in the US and abroad. Ike came back on my radar after many years due to his unwavering support for the people of Palestine. And this is a position that's not very popular in American church circles. So this defiance against the norms of his community has sometimes come at an immense cost. So in today's episode, I hope we can learn more about that. And Adam, as an outsider to the world of Catholic ministry, I hope your perspective can guide us as well. Now, that's the most you'll hear from me in this episode, hopefully. So let's get into your story, Ike. And Adam, do you have anything to add?
I'm sure I will, but at this time, I'm just very excited to have you here, Ike. It will be great to have this chat.
Yeah, thanks.
Ike, what do you want listeners to know about you off the bat?
Yeah, I'm a songwriter, but I kind of got into music in the Christian worship circles. That's the kind of the first songs I learned on the guitar. It's the first crowds I sang in front of, and it was where I was formed, as a musician, as a songwriter. But my journey has taken so many turns where I've seen a lot of my peers and people I've known kind of stay generally where they were. And I've found myself not. And it's led to some severing of ties. It's led to a loss of opportunities in those spaces. But I think at the heart of it, it's hard for me to not be true to who I am. And that's reflected in the songs that I write and the words that I speak. I'm also a dad. I'm really just a dad and a husband. I've got 3 kids who are insane, and that's where most of my time is and my energy is. It's really where I want to be all the time. I also work still at a church, so there's some interesting things in my life that I have to navigate constantly. So yeah, that's kind of me right now. This is a little snapshot of who I am and where I am at the moment.
And where are you based currently?
Yeah, San Antonio, Texas. And I've kind of lived all over the place in the States. Grew up in Columbia, Missouri, in a small little college town. And then I moved to Phoenix, Arizona for several years, where I kind of grew into my ministry career life. Sounds yuck to say that, but that was what it was. Moved to Nashville for several years, really pursuing my artist and songwriting aspects of who I am, and then moved back to Phoenix when I got married. It's all convoluted. And then found ourselves in San Antonio. My wife has family here, and we left Phoenix. I was working at a church that went awry.
Sure.
And decided to move closer to my wife's family.
Thanks for that introduction. And that's where you're at currently, as you said.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if we go back to sort of the beginning, I've read that your parents immigrated to the U.S. from Nigeria.
Yeah, absolutely.
How do you believe that shaped who you are and your journey?
Well, yeah, that's actually a great question. My parents, my dad moved to the States a little bit before my mom to start pursuing his degrees in engineering. So he eventually ended up with an undergrad in engineering and then his master's in education, I believe. But my mom followed my dad from Nigeria when she was 8 months pregnant with me.
Wow.
Yeah, so it was a nightmare scenario for her coming from this tropical, balmy, equatorial country to Columbia, Missouri in the middle of the winter where everything was dead and cold. And, she flew into LaGuardia, which is a horrible introduction into America because it's the worst airport ever. And then she had to figure out how to make her way to Columbia, Missouri. She had the tickets, but she was, it was like crash course. So yeah, my parents are immigrants from Nigeria, and they initially came over on visas that were temporary. Classic case of overstaying visas. We were all born. I have 2 other siblings. All 3 of us were born in the States. So my worldview is a little bit more open. Growing up in Columbia, in a small college town, I had friends who their families had been there for generations. They had no plans on leaving or even, really kind of looking outside of that. We always had this kind of broader world view, which really shaped me as a young person. And also my parents were undocumented after their visas kind of ran out. I felt like we were on the run a little bit. My parents never owned a house. They were constantly renting, and it felt like they were kind of trying to stay ahead of immigration. I had an aunt who came over, who married my uncle, married into the family, and they called her a whole different name, which nobody calls her. Nobody calls her, but that was like their way of hiding her, essentially. That was my kind of introduction. And when you are son of immigrants, African immigrants, you're black in the United States. I looked like my peers who were, born in the States, African American, but I had this different, household experience, where my parents are, calling home every couple of weeks and putting us on the phone with random uncles and aunts and sending money back, and then unable to visit. I went back to Nigeria with my dad when I was 2 because he still had the visa. But then we came back and there was no more movement back home. It was always phone calls because they couldn't go back. That would mean that they wouldn't be allowed back into the country. So especially obviously with the immigration issue right now in our country, I saw it from the inside. I saw a very hardworking mom and dad who were just trying to survive and give their kids the best life that they could in a country that had been ravaged by colonialism. They left, and the naira, which is the Nigerian currency, was higher than the dollar. And then very shortly after, because of Western influence, the currency went down, opportunities dried up. And we talk about the third world, but we don't talk about why.
Yeah.
We don't talk about why.
Well, this podcast does.
Yeah, exactly. Like these countries are, whatever, undeveloped, and there's a reason why. And I got to hear about those things. And so from a very early age, my worldview was slightly different from my contemporaries, from the people that I was around, especially in a small little town, in Missouri, and which in some sense it was very small, but it was also it was a university town. So there was a University of Missouri is there. And so there's also very progressive liberal voices, even in the church, that I was exposed to as well. So it was like kind of this juxtaposition. Columbia is just this interesting place where you have the university and you have these very forward thinking progressive people mixed in with just generational racists. It's a wonderful
stars and bars.
Exactly. Lots of Confederate flags, and Missouri is a very complicated state, within its history. So anyway, I grew up with all of that, and also being, an African kid and feeling left out from the white people that I knew, and feeling left out from the black people I knew, and getting racial slurs from white people, but also like not feeling quite right, or that I quite fit in with my African American friends who I desperately wanted to. So yeah, I just kind of grew up in this kind of middle ground, and sometimes it feels like, but also with this very broad kind of worldview of, I never grew up patriotic. I think Americans have this thing, I remember going to New Zealand a few years ago, and this was 2016. I was doing a festival out there, and we were just kind of talking about the differences between the States and New Zealand, and how patriotism is just not really a thing. Nobody really cares that there's no New Zealand flag. Nobody cares unless there's like it's like
just during the World Cup.
Exactly, right? World Cup, or like when the All Blacks are playing. It's not really a thing. Whereas obviously in America it very much is. And this was on the verge of this 2016, so this was heading into some interesting times.
Yeah.
People that I met were very curious about what was happening. I'm like, I don't know, man. I'll move here. I don't know.
Outside of the States, we all think that the Pledge of Allegiance is something we find particularly unusual. Like, that's something that really we struggle to get our head around outside of the US.
It's so strange. And, when you read more with like sports, for instance, there's thing the national anthem.
But not just before international games, right? Before every game.
Every game.
Yeah.
This is every game.
Because outside you'd do it before an international match, but not before just any games.
Right. And it makes sense, like World Cup, like we're going to honor because we're playing other whatever. But when it's like freaking Green Bay playing the Bears, like why do we need to sing the national anthem? But this was a thing that actually didn't used to happen. And because of the military industrial complex and the propaganda, it was like, this is a huge recruiting tool, and so we sing the national anthem. And like I said, I've never been very patriotic. My parents are just, obviously they weren't. And so I didn't grow up that way. And it's, it's a very black thing as well. Not just like me being an African kid, but like we talk about years ago, obviously Colin Kaepernick was this huge kind of figure. But I remember sitting down for the national anthem in 6th grade, after reading the autobiography of Malcolm X. And this is like something that, I would do with my friend, and so like the Pledge of Allegiance, like you said, is like one of those things, like when you are black in this country, for the most part, it doesn't ever sit well with you. The outward displays of patriotism, Independence Day, is always this, like, if there's always a tension.
I just assigned to my college class a speech by Frederick Douglass where he says, what is 4th of July to a slave?
Yeah. And I post that, I'll post that. I think I posted it again this past July 4th, because what is it still to black person, a person of color, a marginalized person? Like, what does this day mean? But I think about this. I remember where I was for 9/11. I was in Phoenix, Arizona, and I just moved from Columbia to do this Catholic School of Evangelization and Mission, like a 7-month program in Phoenix. And it was this program that was very much rooted in this charismatic Catholic kind of circles. And so I was in this program and 9/11 happened, and it was just obviously this like very terrifying time. I remember having a conversation with a friend of mine at this thing, and I said, I'm worried about our response. Because who are we going to go after? Who? And for what and why? Growing up in Columbia, I had a lot of Muslim friends. Some of my really best, dear friends were Muslim. And I remember for the first time after the Oklahoma City bombing, that a lot of them were expressing this nervousness. And when they found out it was a white guy, they're like, oh, thank God. And that was like my first time, like, why would you guys, I was a kid, So when 9/11 rolled around, once again, I thought, oh God, this is bad. At the time, it was like, rah, rah, America, let's go get them. And because of my upbringing, I think I saw around corners a little bit from these situations, and I thought, this is going to be bad. This is bad. Who are we gonna bomb in the name of revenge? And I remember having this conversation with one of these guys I was doing this program with, and he was like very confused, and I was like, I just worry about what American imperialism and how we'll respond to this. And we obviously in 2025 know it was very bad.
Yeah.
It was.
Right. You've just dropped some immense knowledge there. And let me tell you, you're in the right place on the right podcast. And are you sure you've only listened to one episode before? Because we touch on this a lot.
I know. Well, I remember I listened to the episode and I thought, oh God, like I would sit with you guys and talk for hours and hours and hours. And
we do have a lot of questions for you.
Do.
So if you don't mind giving your time.
Great.
Well, yeah, I'm just curious as to, so you had this upbringing, which sounds like had a lot of influences, your parents coming from Nigeria and then being in this sort of melting pot culture. And I'm sure that wasn't easy. And I'm wondering how then the church, how the Catholic faith kind of fit into all of that. Growing up and leading you to where you are now.
Yeah, so my parents were Catholic, are Catholic. My dad had since passed, it'll be 13 years, but my mom still is. That was my faith experience growing up. We went to church every single Sunday. I was an altar server. I went to youth groups because my mom made me. Yeah, that was part of our lives, was going to church every single Sunday and being involved as much as possible. When I got older and trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, I wasn't a very great student, wasn't very good at school, but I was like, I want to do something different. And so I heard about this Catholic school of evangelization and mission. It was called Youth Arise at the time. It doesn't exist anymore, but it was a 7-month school of evangelization and mission where I would go and like learn about church theology, and I had an internship under a youth minister, and we went to Notre Dame to study philosophy for a month, and then we went on a mission trip to the Virgin Islands. I was 18 and I graduated high school, and then 2 days after that or 3 days after that, I flew to Arizona to start this program. Catholicism was always just kind of there. It always was, my whole life. And when I needed a compass of what to do, so initially when I was about to graduate, I wanted to do like AmeriCorps. Kind of like Peace Corps. And this opportunity came along. I heard about it from a family friend. She's like, hey, these people who you kind of know who are from here are starting this program in Arizona. I think it'd be perfect for you. And so that's how I got connected. Catholicism still, though, was just a thing. I went to church on Sunday. I think had I never went to this Youth Arise program, I don't think I would have been in ministry. But it just kind of worked out that way. Where I heard about this thing, I'm like, yeah, I'll do it. And I went very skeptical. And even the family friend who told us about it, she was a professor of religious studies at the University of Missouri. She was a former nun, very progressive, very left-leaning. And I remember her telling me, hey, watch out for these people. Like, I think this will be good for you, but like they're super like charismatic and they like pray in tongues and do all this stuff. And like, I'm like, oh God. I'm like, I don't want any part of that, And she's like, yeah, just be careful. I'm like, okay. She's like, but I think it'll still be good for you. I'm like, okay, all right, great. So I went, and really my goal was to get back home after this 7-month program and still be normal. My first night, I remember like we had a night prayer, and we were praying the liturgy of the hours, so like this official prayer from the church. And then we had this worship session in the middle of it, and all these people all of a sudden were like speaking in tongues, like they're just speaking in tongues. And I'm like, what is happening right now? Like, and then like, this is what Dr. Rate, is her name, Jill, is warning me about. They're speaking in freaking tongues. And I'm like, this is scary stuff. And so my goal, and I grew obviously really close to these people and I had an amazing time, but my goal was like, I don't want to be like them when I go home. And I ended up being like that. I ended up becoming, sucked me in.
I guess I'm picturing that. And then for context, like I played in a worship band when I was involved with ministry. I played bass. And Adam, when I tell you everyone wanted to be Ike in the US that was in those circles, he was the guy,
right?
So how did you go from like this guy to basically the pinnacle of Catholic youth ministry?
Circumstance, I guess. Like, well, after I did this thing and I got changed and rearranged, and I'm like, yeah, praise the Lord. And I went back home, went to school for a semester in Illinois, and then I moved back to Phoenix, Arizona, which, for what we're talking about, Adam, like this, I don't know how to describe it, but it's very similar to what's like the evangelical kind of movements in the Protestant world, where you have this very emotional Jesus music and whatever. This was like a movement within the Catholic Church in Phoenix. And when I moved back to Phoenix, I worked as a youth minister for a year. And in that year, I got approached by this other church. Now, this other church was where this thing called Life Teen had started.
They were
program.
The big boys.
They were the big boys. Life Teen was this youth ministry program that had started at this church, had gone international. You were like, all these people who worked for Life Teen and, were they were like Catholic famous, It was like, these are like the rock stars of Catholic ministry. And this church, St. Tim's, was like wildly successful, and Life Teen had been born out of this and was in many different Catholic churches around the world. And they called me to interview for a youth minister position, and I thought, yo, I am on my way. I'm on to the big show. It's like a under 21 getting called up for the first team. Like I was like, this is it. I'm going to the show. And that's kind of what happened. I got hired as a youth minister, and I've been leading worship. I've been playing guitar. Like I picked up guitar when I was 18. This is what I do for a living now, but I picked it up for the first time when I was 18. But I was a youth minister, this small church, St. Tim's, the place where to be, called me. I got a job there, and this is where these names won't mean anything to you, Adam, but Sam, they might mean something to you. A guy like Tom Booth, Matt Maher, these guys were like huge.
Matt Maher's played in front of the Pope.
Oh,
right?
wow.
Yeah. So is Tom, so is Tom. Tom is kind of like the grandfather of us. Anyway, the contemporary Christian movement in the Catholic Church really was kind of born out of this church. And I was going to this church, and I went as a youth minister. And I remember I was doing, slowly and surely, Matt and Tom kind of brought me into the music side of it. And it just kind of happened organically, where in the time that I was at this church, I made incredible connections. And a record label publisher out of Oregon called Oregon Catholic Press approached me and said, hey, we would love to do a record with you. And so all this was kind of happening at once, where these big, huge youth conferences where Matt and Tom had been leading at, they started asking me to help them. So I would like go to these summer conferences, and it's in front of 5,000, 6,000 kids, not just kids, but, 5,000, 6,000 people. And this is kind of where that's kind of where it kind of took off. And it wasn't anything that I think I was trying to do. It just happened, where I was in the right place in the right time, and I learned, how to do this from really great people who are really good at it, and just it happened that way. I didn't try to seek it out. It just was. I got lucky, I guess.
I mean, don't downplay your talent, because I've been at mass in random churches in the past, on the intro song when they're walking in or going out. Specifically, I think like a closing song is more of an Ike Ndolo song, but they're playing an approved, it had to go through bishops and everything to get on the list. And Ike's songs that he wrote are played in Catholic churches. So
yeah, I listened to some last night, and they were good stuff. I've not listened to a lot of faith music, but I just enjoyed the music. It was very like peaceful.
Yeah,
it was like
I can't imagine you've listened to that genre before.
No, not really. No. But I enjoyed what I listened to last night. I remember I can't remember the name of the song, but you were talking about being in prison and being let out of prison, and that was
yeah. I do that a lot because really truly, like to backtrack, I remember when I was doing this Youth Arise program, and every week we had a paper due on some sort of theological thing. And I remember, I don't know how this came up, but basically, I remember just specifically talking about liberation theology and how it was not really, how do they say it? Just like liberation theology was like not really Catholic or whatever it was, and because I was in very conservative, right-leaning circles. And so, but liberation is always, I feel like, has always been a part of who I am. And before I became this worship leader, songwriter, Christian artist, I was a kid in Missouri who watched my mom fight racists. In 6th grade, I had a math teacher, and there was 4 black kids in this math class. And it was very clear from everybody in the class that this math teacher did not like the 4 black kids in the school, especially the other 3. And one day after class, she pulled me aside and she said, "Hey, you don't have to be like them." And I, because of the things I've read and who my mom was especially, said, "Ooh, racist." And I went to my mom and I told her, and I had been struggling in that class, and I told her what she said, and my mom went to war. She went to war and got me moved out of that math class, which was like a thing that nobody did. You don't get moved out of a class you've been assigned to. And I remember this teacher came to me one day as the transition was happening, and she wasn't supposed to talk to me, but she's crying. She's like, "I didn't, like da-da-da." I'm like, "I'm not supposed to talk." And I just remember my mom was like that. We were coming back from a weekend trip in Illinois, and we were stopping at a gas station in a small town in Illinois or Missouri, somewhere on the border. And we got there, and we come from church. We're just like this black family, little cute kids with like church clothes on, and clearly we're not a menace. But we got there, and within minutes, several police officers arrived. Nothing happened. They didn't do anything, but I was oblivious. I think I was in 3rd or 4th grade. Parents were like, "Pick a snack, yada, yada, yada." So I didn't think anything of it. And then we got back in the car. My mom is fuming. She's furious. And my dad's like, "Fidelia, calm down, calm down." And my mom's like, "No, do you know what they did?" I'm like, "Yo, what's going on?" And she's like, "They called the police on us, just a family." And she was like, "No, I'm going to go tell them." And my dad's like, "Fidelia, please." And my mom's like, "No, hell no." She got out of that car and I followed her. I'm like, hell yes, I want to see. I'm off. I love the smoke. Give me the smoke. And so she marched into that gas station and ripped everybody in there a new one. The attendant is like, "I know you called the police." And then the police officer who was trying to de-escalate, he was like, "Do I know you? Did we go to?" And my mom was like, "I'm not even from this country." And then she ripped him a new one. It was beautiful. And this is a core memory for me. So while I'm in these very conservative Christian circles, I still have this kind of radicalism and this liberation in my head. So like when you talk about this song about, freeing from prison, I always have liberation, in my head. That's always what I'm, even in my more conservative and kind of right-leaning days, like, I can't help it. And especially when you grow up as a person of color, when you're black in this country, you cannot help it. So yeah, I have that juxtaposition of, especially in that time, being in these very white, conservative, Christian, Catholic circles.
That's an amazing story. Your mum sounds like an incredible woman.
She's great.
That leads me to a question, which is, what is the sort of key aspect of liberation theology for you? What is it about Catholicism, Christianity that lends itself to liberation, and how does that play out for you?
I don't really know. Like I said, I got a high school diploma. I go on vibes.
Sure.
I write songs, but I will say specifically liberation theology, the things that I've read, and it takes Jesus at his actions and his words, when, especially in scripture, whenever the poor are talked about, whenever it talks about the captives being set free. I think white evangelical circles will hear that and say, "We're going to free you from your sin, your personal sin." Liberation theology is like, no, Jesus said, there's lines where it's like, we're going to set the captives free, and it's like actual captives, or feed the poor. That he meant that. That's like a thing that he actually meant for us to do in a radical way. And so I think I've always gravitated towards that part of the gospel. I think especially now in my more kind of deconstructed state, but even when I was younger, I think if there is a hell, I don't think people are going there because they forget to do a rosary 3 times a day. I think they're going there because they ignored the beggar on the street, and so I think those are the things that have always resonated with me, and I don't necessarily fear it as much as I'm happy. I'm happy to do that, because to me that's the actual joy of what the gospel could be. Is not this kind of like personal, you're bad sin. It's looking at the person next to you, especially the marginalized, and saying, "I will do what it takes, whatever it takes to break your chains," essentially. And evangelical circles, white evangelical circles, conservative Catholic Christian circles, it's break your chains of sin. Liberation theology is like, no, your chains, whatever chain it is, I'm going to stand in the gap to break that.
We've been discussing that a bit about Pope Francis, and he was a big advocate for liberation theology. We haven't recorded these yet, but coming soon for the listeners, an episode about why Jesus was a Marxist.
Yes.
Also, the Marxist priests of South America fighting against the sort of American hegemony down there in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah, nothing strikes fear into a pastor, a priest, than the Sunday where, the Acts reading is brought up and the apostles shared all things in common. I mean, I laugh every single time that rolls around because you'll see Jesus wasn't a socialist. He didn't mean, I'm like, oh my gosh, dude, like, get out of here, And so anyway, I don't know why. I don't know. I mean, I do know why. I know that we're in the throes of destructive late stage capitalism, and for many Christians, Jesus is buttoned up with a tie and, blonde, blue-eyed, and he says all these things that he never said, and it's like, well, he didn't really mean that, like when he said a rich man won't enter the kingdom of heaven because it'll be like going through the eye of a needle. It's like, well, the eye of a needle was really this doorway into Jerusalem. Like, dude, no, I think he actually meant that. Like, I think he meant like if you're rich, you're screwed, man. Like, because he knows what it means. My mom is so funny. I'm going on tangents, but my mom, whenever she meets a rich Nigerian, she just like, she clams up because she's like, she knows, like, and I'm like, Mom, why are you being so rude to this are people? She's like, yeah, but they're rich. And, a rich person from Nigeria, the people that they had to exploit and step on. This is what I grew up with, man. And so like when I'm, in my 40s and I hear like, we're going to eat the rich, I'm like, yeah, we're going to eat them rich people. Like, what I'm saying? Because this is what I've believed my whole life, that to be a billionaire is to be an exploiter, to be a slaver. And so like, the radical parts of Jesus, and this is, like deconstruction is this buzzword. It's been hopping around for a while, and I don't even use that word a ton, but I think I've been in this mode of deconstructing this Republican white Jesus for a long, long time, because I think if the gospel is real, it's harder than just saying a bunch of prayers. When he says to the rich man, give it all away, ooh-wee, that one gets me, because as much as a socialist as I feel like I am, I also like good stuff, right? I want to be comfortable, and like like whenever I have gigs, and when I used to gig, and like, hey, we're gonna put you up in the Waldorf or the whatever, the Ritz. I'm like, man, I could get used to this, and like, so we all want that, but that's not what socialism means, but it's become this very evil thing. Even saying it right now, like, I'm in San Antonio, Texas, very military, very conservative Texas, obviously. And so we have there's this concept of even that reading in Acts when it says the early Christians shared everything, and to see the pastors twist themselves in knots or completely ignore it altogether because it's way too
trickled down to everyone.
It's a funny thing to me. So, I mean, to go back, to start with liberation, it is the key. And I think we anthropomorphize God. And I think when we change Jesus, like there are things that he never talked about, which Christians make their whole existence. Like he never talked about queer people, but we make it our whole thing. We can't allow them to whatever, but he's like, Jesus never, ever even said anything about queer people. So why is this our whole thing? But what he did say is he said, feed the poor, sell all your things, like we can't talk about the things that he actually said because, clearly he didn't mean it. And it's rationalized away. And so I think to me, being a person who follows Jesus is really hard if you actually followed what he said. Because even for myself, who's a big mouth and wants to talk about liberation, like I like my things, man. Like
things are nice.
Yeah, things are nice. I want to have a little money, like I've got 3 kids, man. It'd be nice to like not live paycheck to paycheck. I still, in my heart of hearts, believe that Jesus meant what he said, and what he said, especially some of the harder things, is those are the things that get ignored, but those are the things that actually matter.
Well said.
Yeah. I mean, you know Sam a little bit. I'm still there. I think that's the thing. Like, I'm still in these spaces, not to the same extent. When you saw me in 2012 leading worship for 6,000 kids at Steubenville, San Diego, the pandemic, as awful as it was a chance for me to reset. And I was all set for the summer of 2020 to do a whole new round of Steubenville conferences. And I had some very interesting conversations that started on Twitter about the damage that these conferences had done, specifically with chastity culture and how queer people were addressed. And I had a Zoom meeting with a bunch of these people. Some of them worked for Life Teen or still working for Life Teen. Some had obviously been in conferences for a long time. And we talked about it. And the conferences have been canceled, obviously, for that summer. But I made the decision. And these are kind of lucrative for me, like
it's a big weekend.
Yeah, it's a big
because
weekend.
It's not just one, Adam. He'll do like 5 or 6.
Yeah, I'll do 5. I think I do 4. I'll do 4 of these Steubenville youth conferences. They're in different locations.
And by the way, to Adam, who's never heard of this word, it comes from Franciscan University, which is in this small town in Ohio called Steubenville.
Okay.
And it's like the BYU of Catholics. Like it's not like Notre Dame or Boston College where you go there and it's just like a normal college. It's like the nuns follow you if you're out with a female, to make sure you're being chaste.
Yeah, it's an intense thing. Yeah, and so I'd already been feeling like I want to slowly moonwalk my way out of these conferences, but with the reset really that COVID presented, that year I was slated to do 4 of those, and obviously they were canceled. And then the next year when they asked like, hey, and they tried to it's 2020, it was 21. I thought, God, like they're still trying to do conferences, and so they asked me. I said no, and I just kept saying no. Asked me, I think 3 years, and then I kept saying no, and they stopped asking, and I didn't make any declarative statements about I'm not going to do Steubenvilles. But it was also that time, obviously we know COVID, and then within that the George Floyd incident and kind of the uprisings and the protests. I saw some people that I've been doing these conferences for a long time, and I saw a lot of these people that I've been doing conferences with just saying the most awful things online. These are people who I thought were friends, people who I had, shared meals with and hung out with their families. And I thought, I cannot anymore. I can't be on the stages with these people.
And these comments were specifically in reference to George Floyd.
George Floyd. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And even COVID in general, they're mask.
Because at this point, you'd been like at the pinnacle, and it had been a while now, right? Like you'd been doing this for like a decade.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you referenced your politics that you've kind of always had on certain things, but do you feel it was more you were continuously changing, or was the community around you changing, or was it a bit of both?
Yeah, definitely a bit of both. I mean, I definitely was going through re-radicalization, coming from a young kid at 18 and then kind of falling in head first into this conservative Christian evangelical-y type space, and then getting re-radicalized with Trayvon Martin.
And that was which year was Trayvon Martin?
Trayvon Martin was 2012, I think. 2012 or 2013, I can't remember. But, when I was 18, I remember there was an African immigrant in New York who he had a wallet, and he pulled out his wallet, and he was shot like 90 times by the NYPD. And I remember I put up posters. I made these makeshift things with a Black Power fist, and I put up all over the school. This is who I was in high school, and then kind of going through this like falling asleep time where I was just all Jesus ministry stuff all the time. And then Trayvon Martin started to wake me up again. And then Mike Brown in St. Louis, in Ferguson, Missouri, because Ferguson, St. Louis area is very close to where I grew up, started to chip away. So I was changing, but people around me maybe were changing, or they were revealing who they were. Because what was happening is I was posting about these things, paying rapt attention to what was happening in like Florida and Ferguson. And the people that I was doing ministry with were posting as well. And it was awful. I couldn't believe it. I was like, wait, shouldn't we all care about this as Christians? Like, shouldn't we care that these people have been unjustly murdered by the state? And it was the opposite. And that's when it started. And that's when, at the time, especially with Mike Brown, that was 2013, I think, I was really truly at the pinnacle of my traveling. It was not just doing these youth conferences. I had 2 records out. I was doing shows. I was touring. And those opportunities started to dry up the more vocal I became. And I would say these things to people and they would placate me. But I'm like, no, this is actually happening. Like, I can see a drop in my interest. Like, no, clearly no. And I remember this Catholic artist, she got a hold of me because she was supposed to do this gig in North Carolina. And she was like, hey, I am supposed to do this gig and I can't. Can you cover for me? I'm like, yeah, I'm not doing anything that weekend. Not a problem. This might have been 2016, I think. She sent me a screenshot of the email that she got from this diocesan youth director who said, Ike is not suitable for our events due to his comments on, he said, MySpace. This is an old guy, 2016, MySpace wasn't a thing. 2016,
Wow.
MySpace was fully gone, but because she was confused. He's like, what does she mean MySpace? Like, you're on MySpace? And I just no, he means social media, Facebook, whatever. At the time, Facebook mostly, Twitter. Yeah, so these, so this was for me, it was this is happening. It's like shadow banned, no one's rising up and saying boycott Ike, but I wasn't getting the same amount of gigs that I used to. And for me, it is very hard for me. Like I said, I'm getting re-radicalized. I couldn't go back. I wasn't going to go back. I wasn't going to do it to save my gigs. I couldn't. And I doubled down.
Right.
And I became even more of a big mouth.
Well, you're speaking to 2 fellow big mouths, obviously.
Yeah,
We made a podcast about our radicalization. So.
Yeah. The ecosystem that I had been in was, one, I felt like, I'd already struggled with a lot of my own personal things, feeling like this kind of token black whatever, in these circles, and people loved me and they kept booking me for stuff. And then I started to become vocal and those things went away. Was it a little bit of self-sabotage? Yeah, I think so. For wrong reasons. It was those gigs that I'm not getting called for. I don't want to be that anyway. And so, this specific gig in North Carolina, I remember sharing with a couple of people and they were shocked because they knew this person. I was like, oh, I'm going to look into this. And, they never, I never heard back because I was already somebody on the outside who was let in. And because I wasn't following the rules and towing the line, I was being shadow banned a little bit, essentially. And it wasn't full on, but it was, it was starting to happen. And even then, I was still traveling quite a bit. And then also finding people who are like, hey man, I love what you're saying. I love your message. Even Life Teen they had me do, I think after the woman got killed in Charlotte.
After the Unite the Right rally, is that the...
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm. They had me, I wrote a little for this youth ministry, Adam, for this youth ministry organization that I had been doing events for and whatnot for years. Had me write a reflection on it. And so there were still people who were like, we are interested, I guess, in who you are and what you're saying, and a little bit more of a radical voice. But I didn't stop. And it maybe got a little bit more, radical. Where, and then COVID happened, and truly after that summer, I thought I cannot be a part. I can't. I saw one of the priests who I'd done several conferences with and gigs with, who was featured on Fox News and Newsmax, and I was like, no, I can't, won't, will not. So yeah, it's weird because I enjoyed those things. I enjoyed going out. I enjoyed playing music and leading other people. But I also started to question everything, not just speaking out against injustice, but questioning it all of it. My doubts sprang up, and I had a lot of significant things happen personally. My dad died. My brother lost his daughter when she was 22 weeks, which, rocked me. My best friend died. So I was already in this kind of vulnerable place where it wasn't just me being this person who was speaking out for racial injustice, but it was the whole thing.
Yeah.
I mean, what is God?
Yeah, right.
What is this whole thing? So my dad died, and a month later I was in front of, 10,000, 15,000 people in DC for a pro-life rally, and playing these songs, and I just was like a shell where it was all these things, everything from questioning what all this is for to becoming re-radicalized, you know. And so like I was struggling on those stages where it seemed like everything was okay, but I was really struggling with my faith in general, what that meant to be a follower of Jesus, let alone, you know, on the other side where I thought, where the lack of justice and justice is being ignored by the church, and we, for a lot of people, standing on the wrong side. So yeah, all this was kind of going on, and I was a little lost. Still am.
Adam, I knew Ike had listened to our preseason episode because he messaged me on Instagram and said, "Was I playing the pro-life march you went to?"
Yeah.
Quite possibly.
And it was funny. Every year there's this big pro-life march and rally in DC and all these events and youth events. And I had gone to them as a kid and played at the Verizon Center, you know, like it was huge. And I remember it was already a miserable event only because of like the times. They like had to get there and like sound check was like 4 a.m. and then we played at 7. It was a whole thing. It was rough. So I was already like, I hate this. It's just the worst. As my re-radicalization and my deconstruction was taking place, I'm seeing this thing become yuck, political and weird. And I was just like, no. And so they asked me to do it. And I thought they weren't going to ask me because they thought they were also looking at my Instagram or my Twitter. But they asked me, I remember one year, and my booking guy was like, hey, they're asking you to do this thing again. Big deal in DC. And I tentatively said yes. I'm like, okay, fine. Like, let's get the contracts going. And like, it's fine. And then I was dragging my feet, and my booking guy was like, they really want to finalize this because we need to know if you're going to be here, because the year before Mike Pence showed up at this rally and we need to have your name for the Secret Service or whatever, you know, like clearance. And I said, oh, hell no. I think we had already signed the contract, and I said, no, not going.
Yeah.
My booking guy at the time was like, dude, I'm like, I don't care, not going.
Wow.
Even that there would be a march that big of pro-lifers, I think Adam's European brain can't comprehend it.
It's certainly not something that's so common here.
No, it can't imagine that. I was at a church that I had been at off and on for years as an assistant music director. And then later on, actually in 2019, right before COVID, I became the music director because I had moved from Nashville. I was married and I had a kid on the way. And I thought, I'm not traveling that much anymore. It'd be nice to have a steady job. And the pastor there was a friend. He hired me. Then COVID hit and then he left. And we got a new pastor in. And this new pastor was the worst. Don't cut that. He needs to know. I'll send it to him personally. He was the worst. He was awful. Essentially, we had a meeting, which he kind of approached me in a very condescending way, and I reported him to the diocese and said, I think this is prejudicial and racist. And then he came back, changed his tune, but also tried to make my time there at the church kind of a living hell. And it culminated in he fired our sound guy, who was a friend of mine, because he was just, I don't know, he was just trying to be a hatchet man or whatever. And I'm like, that was a big mistake because we need this guy. Well, a Sunday rolls around, everything's going haywire, and this pastor, this priest, his mic wasn't working. Well, I'm trying to fix it. We're trying to fix it. And before his homily, he starts yelling at me in front of the whole church to fix it. I'm like, we're trying. And he's like, give me your mic, yelling at me. And so it was this whole thing where I was like, I was seeing red. And I had a friend of mine who was like, luckily there. Okay, let's just. And this is in the middle, Sam. You know how big this is middle mass.
This is a sacrament, right?
Like, this is middle of mass. This is a huge deal. Wow. And I remember I told my wife what happened because I had already been planning on leaving because he was making it horrible. I told her what happened. I'm like, dude, my next 3 weeks. She's like, no, leave. I'm like, oh yeah, because I had been so used to getting kicked around in church circles, and you just kind of take it. You put on the hair shirt, the whip, and you're like, okay, it's fine for the Lord. She was like, no. I'm like, yeah, no, I'm not. So I quit that day. That's when we moved to San Antonio several months later to be closer to her family because I thought I would be traveling more and it'd be nice for my wife to be closer to her family. But that also didn't happen. And now I'm working in another church, which also wasn't the plan. A lot of the impetus for me getting that pastor coming after me was because of the things I post, because of the things that podcasts I'm on, podcasts that I had started, me being a big mouth, essentially. But I can't help it.
You've alluded to this a bit. Where did the dots connect between this liberation theology, this change in politics a bit, and then that connection to the church and capitalism as a whole?
Where do the dots connect?
I think we've seen a lot of the dots, but
sure.
Where was that radicalizing point towards the capitalist system, the hegemony we live in?
That's a great question. I don't think it was a moment. I just think it was a natural. I thought when I was younger I was going to be a civil rights activist. And when you're talking about white supremacy, when you're talking about racism specifically, eventually, when you're looking at it, you realize that it is all rooted in capitalism. White supremacy and racism was rooted in capitalism. You know, what happened in this country, slavery was economic. How do we exploit and get our goods and our services done as cheaply as possible? Boom, we found some people who will be great. We'll take them from their land. How do we get everybody else on board? Because you still have this disparity. And this is what people will use today. It's like, well, the Civil War was not fought over slavery, it was states' rights, because not everybody owned slaves. They were the powerful people. We see that today, right? Like the people who owned slaves and had slaves were on top. And so how do you get these poor white people to buy in? Well, white supremacy. And you say to these people, it's like, hey, because if you don't do that, they're like, poor whites will realize we're just like them. And actually,
they'll become class conscious, right? As Marx would say.
Exactly. And so white supremacy says, hey, we're together on this, man. Like you and me, like we're better than these monkeys, man. Like we're in on it. And so they become co-conspirators, and they're like, the top bring in the bottom, and they say like, yo, we're together. Look at the skin, you know, white, we're together in this. And so these poor whites go against their best interest. Their best interest would have been like, no, dude, this is stupid. We're not going to, slavery is the worst thing for us. No. But if you get them to buy into supposed superiority, then they're in. And when you start realizing like, oh, it's all capitalism. And I mean, those dots were already connected when I was younger. I took an African American studies class my junior and senior year. I had a teacher, his name is worth mentioning because I think he was so instrumental in my life in many ways. His name is Mr. Janda, Mark Janda. I learned about these things way before anybody else was talking about them on Twitter, before there was social media. He was talking about these things at our classes, and I was blown away. And so those dots had already started, but it wasn't until later on, as I'm going through my re-radicalization and fighting against this kind of personal racism, where like that person was mean to me and called me the N-word, to like, wait a minute, it's systemic. We're fighting against a system that's against me and people who look like me. Okay, but why? Well, economically, it kind of makes sense, because on a pure capitalist way, if we can exploit people, keep them divided also, even though they have way more in common with each other, then we can exploit this group of people both. And so after slavery, during Reconstruction, we have this time where black people are starting to spread their wings. They're in government. They're, starting these towns. And then white supremacy snaps out of it. Capitalism snaps out of it. It can't have this. And so we have Jim Crow. And we have, once again, this kind of like separating of the class. Like, listen, you're like us. And slavery, which was so integral to America's economy, is now gone. But how do we make sure that it's not gone? Well, we continue to exploit, and we just find a new way, So slavery never went away. We just started arresting all these people and making them work for free. And really, we thought this was gone. Like, look, the Emancipation Proclamation, and there's no more slavery. But that was never the case. It was never the case. And anytime any sort of radical civil rights activist starts to connect the dots is when they're gone. Martin Luther King was instrumental in desegregation, but when he started the Poor People's Campaign and said, what we really need to go after is poverty, not just for black people, but for everybody. Shot.
Yeah.
You look back and you say like, yeah, this is the real threat. The real threat is when people become class conscious. And when you have these figures who are saying, yes, we have this, but this is a thing that was created specifically to keep us apart, to keep our eyes closed, to keep us away from each other, and to keep us from liberation. Fred Hampton from the Black Panther Party, like he started his Rainbow Coalition, heinously murdered. You can see this throughout all of world history. Socialist governments try to rise.
Oh, we know. We talk about it a lot.
Like I said, you guys know. When did the dots connect? I think it was just because of my passion for anti-racism that parallels all of a sudden. I didn't really think anything about capitalism until 6 years ago, and I thought, whoa, this makes so much sense. Yes, white supremacy and racism, but like it's all rooted in capitalism. We've all been kind of bought into this weird dream of being rich, and people will come out of the woodwork to defend billionaires. Like, you'll never be a billionaire. You know that? Like, you'll never be that guy. And like, why would you want to be that guy? And essentially, when you get there, you know that you've hurt so many people. But like, listen, it'll never happen for you. But I think maybe the American dream that we've been sold is like, we can, anybody can. You just got to work hard enough. I'm like, dude, billionaires didn't work for that stuff. They don't work for anything.
I think Adam has mentioned before that his radicalization was like solidified as a leftist when he read the Jakarta Method. You want to describe it in 30 seconds, Adam?
Yes, please, because I want to hear it.
It's a fantastic book. I'd really recommend it. It's about the anti-communist measures in Indonesia during the 50s, which was CIA-backed, and in which 1 million people were killed.
Wow.
And I'd never heard of it, and I'd never heard of it because it was so successful in suppressing communism in Indonesia. After the Second World War, it was the third largest communist party in the world after the USSR and China, and it was very popular there. The non-aligned movement, where the term Third World comes from, which originally just meant countries not aligned with either the USSR or the United States. That was in Indonesia, and because of, basically CIA money, 1 million people were killed to suppress that.
Wow.
Yeah, and so I read that book and I'm like, oh, yeah, this is how it all fits together, much like yourself.
Wow.
And Adam sits in the capital of the Netherlands, who used to own Indonesia.
Yeah.
He sees the remnants of that a lot.
Oh, yeah, there's some very pretty buildings here that were paid for by some truly horrific acts.
Wow.
Where we stand, I think we align largely politically, but we have Ike, who obviously was at the pinnacle of Catholic worship music and with a lot of conservative circles in the past. You have myself, who was in the early stages sort of Ike's story there, trying to get to where he was, and now I no longer go to church, and I couldn't reconcile that community with my beliefs now. And then you have Adam, who's never been religious and has been quite...
Yeah, somewhat animus towards organized religion at times.
So how do you reconcile still having your faith amidst a community that you might disagree so much with today? And then also, where do you see, I guess, people like me and Adam fitting within, I guess, maybe a new community for yourself?
Ooh, yeah. So how do I reconcile? I don't, actually. I think the thing that I think about most is rediscovering for me who Jesus is. For a good long time, I did worship that blonde-haired, blue-eyed Jesus who said, "Blessed are those who pull themselves up by their bootstraps," or something. I had to let that guy go, or else I wouldn't have made it. And I still really struggle. So now I'm trying to reconnect with the brown liberating Jesus. And it's a little bit complicated because I don't want to walk around with a superiority complex, but I'm comforted by the words that he said and the words that he didn't. And I think the words that he said are radical enough for me to lean in on those. And there's other voices within the church, which helped, I think when Pope Francis came around, I thought before he came around, I was really struggling. And I remember crying. He came out, he didn't put on the regalia. He was very humble, and he pissed off so many American Catholics, and I love that so much.
Yeah, Adam got to learn a lot about his whole life.
Yeah.
But we did an episode on it.
Yeah. Those are the things that kind of kept me going, kept me around. I've got really good friends who I can talk to and keep me sane, but it is a struggle, very much so. It's a real struggle. You can also throw church hurt. I've worked for 6 pastors, and 3 of those pastors were removed. One was excommunicated.
Whoa.
Yeah, like a thing.
Wow, that's pretty rare.
I know. I heard about it. I'm like, they're gonna excommunicate Dale. And I'm like, what? I thought that was like a medieval thing. I didn't think that they did that. So it was like insane. Like it was intense. Like I worked for some really bad people. So not only is my political leanings and even like my theology are at odds sometimes, it's also the hurt that I've experienced, like I talked about in Phoenix. And so that I've always got my hackles up. So it is hard. But like I said, I do think the important things that Jesus said, love your neighbor, even your enemy, which are super hard. Think about him turning over tables, and I'm like, he's an anti-capitalist, I think about those things and I think, okay, I can still be here. I think that's what gets me through the day. especially for someone whose paycheck is still kind of wrapped up in the church. And I'll say it because they'll, I'm sure those people will listen to this, and I need them to know that I know that you're talking about me, fools. But getting, like people already telling my pastor about, do you hear what Ike's saying? I'm like, well, here we go. It's like deja vu because this is what's been happening. But like, and I had, we had a meeting about it. I'm like, listen, I'm not saying anything online really that Pope hasn't said. Maybe I say a little bit more. So anyway, that is how, but it is hard. It is very, very hard. And a friend of mine he talked to a mutual friend of ours who's a priest, and he's like, dude, I talked to this mutual friend of ours, and I'm like, how are you doing it? And this priest said, dude, barely hanging on, like fingernails. I like the spirituality of even Catholicism, but I think what has happened, and Sam, like you said, like the people, not just parishioners, people in the pews, but even pastors and priests, been severely let down. And when we left Phoenix for San Antonio, I was done. We didn't go. I was over it. I stayed home on Sundays and watched Liverpool.
Yeah.
This is going to get very churchy, Adam, sorry, but it's literally by the grace of God, I guess, because, and this is just honest, like, Christians don't do this enough, but I mean, most Sundays I'd rather be at home watching Liverpool with my kids, it's all I ever want to do. And a lot of it too is like, I'm working for a church, I'm in those spaces, like it's hard when livelihood is wrapped up in those things, because I went all in on the worship thing, went all in. It's all I know how to, it's all I do. I think what's cool too is like, even at my church, I get people come up to me, it's like, dude, I listen to your podcast. I had a podcast, years ago that we stopped because it was a lot of emotional labor for us, but at least for me, I listened to your podcast or I saw your post, and like, dude, I just want to let you know that we're all whispering to each other, like, dude, I agree with you. We're all like behind enemy lines, and I want to get a little group together of all the people who have whispered to me, like, dude, I'm with you, man. I'm with you.
And I guess, have you found solidarity in non-religious people?
Yes.
Nowadays?
Oh yeah. Non-religious people are my favorite people. Yeah, for sure. I feel a little bit more at ease, I think, in those spaces. And like I said, this is something that it's okay for it to be out there, because it's something that I'll stand by, man, because there's just, this is a story. Sorry, I keep going into tangents, but I did this show. I did a record called Shine, which was not a religious record at all. And so did a couple club bar shows, and I did open for this artist. And after the show, I was talking to his bass player. And so we're just like talking, and I told him like, yeah, this is what I do. Like, my day job is singing Jesus songs at a church and for a bunch of people. He's like, whoa. And he was like, not a believer at all, not a Christian. And so we were just kind of talking through it, and I was being very candid, like, dude, I've gone through a lot, and there are some days where I really struggle, and some days I don't know if I believe in God. Like, that's the reality of like I'm a doubter, So anyway, we were having a great conversation, and this dude was standing off to the side, and he comes up to me after I'm kind of done talking with this dude. He was like, hey, I really enjoyed your set. I couldn't help but listen to your conversation. I kind of knew it was coming, but I'm like, yeah. And he's like, yeah. And he's like, I just want to let you know, man. He said this. His word for it. He's like, I want to let you know you're not a Christian.
Whoa.
His kid said this to me, man. I was like, wow.
Just want to let you know, as if he's doing you a favor.
Yeah. It was unbelievable, man. He's like, I just want to let you know you're not a Christian. I had way more meaningful experiences with non-religious people. Authenticity. There's no baggages left behind, and we're just us. I had this conversation with this dude. He was a kid, I'm like, man. At the end of it, I was like, we just don't see eye to eye on this, and like, Godspeed, and call me in 10 years when everything has gone wrong. Like, call me in 10 years when your world's in shambles, and like, until then, we're not on the same. He was like, I feel like you're condescending. And I'm like, listen, man, I'm not trying to like.
How did you start the conversation?
Yeah, I don't even remember.
No, but I'm saying him.
Yeah,
he came out.
Yeah, well, yeah,
like
yeah, exactly. And I remember thinking like, dude, I'm not, man. I don't think I'm better than you. I just think we're in different places, and that's okay. And I said to him like, I was you, and I'm not you anymore.
I was that too.
Yeah,
that was me at the Steubenville.
Yeah,
that, like, Adam knowing me in the last 10 years, I don't think he would recognize the one that went to see Ike play.
Yeah.
Like, I tell him, I think when he first heard about that, he couldn't believe.
Yeah.
That was me.
It sounds like you were both different at that concert.
Yes. Yeah. 2012, I was
sure.
completely, I mean, everything was still hunky-dory at that time. I was, 2013 when everything started to shift, really, truly shift. Trayvon Martin happened, my dad died, all these things. It was a cascade. Yeah. It's cool. And, like, what's cool about this, Sam, is I've had a lot of conversations with people like you. Who are like, dude, I saw you in 2009, 2012, 2011, whatever, at this conference, yada, 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 this concert. And I just want to say that I've been, like, following you. And I appreciate your voice, and that means a lot.
I think that's what I sent him when I reached out.
Yeah, and he, like, literally, I think you might have been the third person in that week or something, and it was like,
wow.
And it means a lot to me because there's a little bit of me that feels like, oh gosh, there's people that I've let down. That's not like a huge thing, but it's actually super encouraging to hear. It's cool to hear that there's other people who are like on that journey too, who haven't stayed in the same place, who've asked questions, who've opened up their minds a little bit and have taken a journey. And so, like, I would love to gather all these people. And like I said, like the people that whisper at me at church, I'm with you, like I just like, can we all just get together and have a dope conversation and time together? But so anyway, I really appreciate those things, and it also makes me feel like less of a crazy person. Like, am I the one? No, it's not.
You're not a crazy person. Don't worry. No, Adam, please tell Ike how the rest of the world sees the conservative Americans.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
I don't know anymore. I used to have a view of that, but the rest of the world has also gotten pretty crazy.
Yeah.
A lot of contradictions. Let's say that. This feels like a lot of contradictions.
I mean, that brings us. I mean, it's been a long route to this, and we really appreciate the time.
Oh yeah,
you've given.
Happy to do it.
The thing that put you back on my radar was your support for Palestine.
Yeah.
When I stepped back from the church, I didn't just go unfollow everyone on my social media that all the influential speakers and musicians and everything.
I did.
Well, what I ended up doing was, as soon as I saw someone come out in support of Trump or against, name the topic, that's when I was like, okay, I don't want this in my feed anymore.
Yeah.
And I guess I never realized that I hadn't unfollowed you at all, but Instagram has a way of just showing us what we want to see.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't see you for like years on my feed. Yeah. And then October 7th, 2023 happens. And all of a sudden, Ike is popping up on my feed again. And I was like, oh no, is Ike, is he going to post something about Trump's reelection? Or, oh, please, no. And then it was Ike in support of Palestine. And I was like, what? That you're the only person from that world that has these opinions, at least that I know there are more, but that I have seen. So that really put you back on my radar. I mean, it shouldn't have been a surprise because I know you're a good guy, but that put you back on the radar and really made me want to get you on this podcast.
Yeah.
And I'm curious about, because with Palestine, I mean, I studied Palestinian refugees in my undergrad. Adam has a long history of protesting for Palestine in Europe. We shouldn't say it twice.
Yeah, they're in the UK now. Palestine Action, which is a non-violent group, has been designated a terrorist organization. Even voicing tenuous support for that could result in some pretty serious consequences. So I want to make it clear, that's not what I'm doing. But I do have a Palestinian flatmate and have been to lots of pro-Palestine protests here in Amsterdam.
Yeah.
Adam and I have a long history of supporting Palestine. So I guess where you sit in Arizona, then Texas, I guess how did you come to have Palestine as an important cause to you?
Yeah.
In this community where it's not spoken about like that.
Sure. And really kind of the opposite. Yeah. 2019, I was just doing a little bit more research. I don't know how, but it came up through my feed. And I just started just reading. For the longest time, people would always say, well, it's complicated. It's complicated. It's complicated. Not knowing that was a tactical Israeli propaganda thing to get us to turn away, for a lot of people to turn away. So before October 7th, I just started reading about it. My mom actually went to the Holy Land. She's a very, very Catholic person, but I remember her telling me about, like, she was like really shocked about the treatment of Palestinian people. But I was just started doing this research on my own, and it doesn't take me long to see this is an injustice. So I remember posting way back in 2019, I think I said Free Palestine. And I think that might have been another nail in the coffin for me for gigs, because I was still trying to travel a little bit. But man, oh man. And the thing with me, people don't like flood my DMs or my comment section with dissent. They just quietly unfollow, which is fine. Or just note, this is not our guy anymore. Look, it's 2025. It's social media could be a very, very powerful tool. And I've curated the things that I see, but for some reason I saw this account talking about the plight of Palestinian people, and I started looking into. Honestly, it was like, what is? I literally had no idea before 2019 what the conflict was between Palestinians and Israelis. I had no idea, and then I just started looking. I was shocked. I was like, and then I thought, well, this isn't complicated.
Yeah.
It's not complicated. And I was like, they want us to believe that. And so when October 7th happened, I knew that this was going to be bad for Gaza. I had no idea that it was going to be this bad and go on this long. And I don't think it took me long to start saying something, because my feed was filled with dead babies. I just don't think it's very complicated. I saw my kids in these kids. So it didn't take much at all. I just don't understand personally. It's just like, how do you see human beings being treated this way? Wholesale slaughter, a genocide literally broadcast on our phones and not do anything. So it didn't take much. It wasn't like a thing that happened on October 7th. I had already been doing a little bit more research on what exactly this was, because unless you know, you have no idea. I grew up with a Jewish best friend, but we also had a lot of Muslims around us. And like my friend would always joke with our Muslim friend. They would like joke back and forth, like, oh, you're Jewish, you're Muslim. And I was like very confused. I'm like, wait, what? I don't understand that, but I never even took the time, but I didn't know that it was really stemmed from this Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I didn't know about 1947. I had no idea about any of these things. I had no idea about the creation of Israel. I had no clue. And then I started looking into it, and I was like, wow. I couldn't believe it. I had no idea about settlers and I've heard the West Bank for years and years and years. I had no idea what this place was or what it looked like or who these people were. When you just do a little scratch, it's very easy. And my heart breaks every single day. And I followed these accounts with people on the ground, and I just never turned away. I tried to hold space and grief, and all I have really is like a little bit of money and a tiny platform. That's all I got.
Yeah.
I think it was Desmond Tutu, I'm paraphrasing here, on the topic of Israel-Palestine, said something to the effect of, if an elephant is standing on a mouse's tail and you say that you're neutral, the mouse will not appreciate your neutrality.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's it in a nutshell. I wish I could say I read all these books and didn't. I just looked into the creation of Israel. Really, truly. And that was it. That was it. I looked into the modern state of Israel. I'm like, oh, okay. And I looked into Zionism. I'm like, whoa.
Yeah.
And that was it. I just had a screaming match with the reporter from, it's just like a left-leaning Catholic news publication, because they published an article on a song that I did called God and the Rubble, which I wrote for Palestine. And I thought this reporter was calling me to just kind of button up some stuff before they published it, but he called to like argue with me. And I'm having this screaming match with him in Bernie, Texas, small town, about Palestine. I'm literally screaming about Palestine. He's saying some crazy stuff.
And he's left-leaning.
And it was because of the bridge of my song, of the song is, from the river to the sea we will be free indeed. That line can really inflame some people, but even he was like, Google the origins. And like, I even did Google the origins. I'm like, are you a journalist, dude? Like, even Google says like this phrase is not born out of a place of, because it's like they want to kill all Jews. It's like, that's not what it was. Even, what are you talking about? And so anyway, for fear of sounding like a dummy, I'll stay in my lane a little bit and say, I saw the pain, like I saw the injustice. And I was like, no, I can't. And I know that it's a very divisive thing. No one is speaking on it. No left-leaning pastors, no Christian music, nobody, no one. And I just think shame for shame.
Yeah.
Shame on us.
There's times in that song, because I wanted to bring up that song you wrote called God in the Rubble.
Yeah.
And at some points in the song, I hear you talking to the people of Gaza to like look for God. God is with them. But then other times you're seemingly, at least in my analysis, talking to like some Americans in church communities.
Yeah.
How has this been received? And I guess, was that the intent as well?
Yeah, absolutely. How has it been received? Not well. As you can imagine, but the song was based off of a sermon from a Palestinian pastor, Christian pastor. His name is Munther Isaac, and he did a Christmas homily on Christ is in the rubble, and I just thought that was so poignant, and so I was moved. The song starts with "Where were you?" It was all things, actually. When I say "Where were you when the bombs began to fall?" That's the first line of the song, and I'm talking to God. I'm talking to the West. I'm talking to Christians, to anybody who calls themselves a person of goodwill, to myself. Where were you when I was at my worst, when bombs were beginning to fall? Where were you? What were you doing? Did you listen? Did you care? Did you try? So it is this kind of back and forth. And the chorus is kind of rooted in Dr. Isaac's homily, Christ in the Rubble. God was in the rubble. That for me, it was answering the question, when I'm asking God, where are you? Theologically, I don't know. I struggle with the concept of a loving God letting this happen to so many people throughout history, not just here, but throughout history. So I struggle with that. I sing those things to give myself hope. So when I sing God is in the rubble, reaching for my hand, it was like, I hope he's there. I want to believe that he is. But it's also to say to the Christian, you weren't here, but God is. Especially if you call yourself a believer and you call yourself a Christian and you advocate, but you advocate for the senator signing bombs, bombing children. I don't know what God you're worshiping or what Jesus you say you follow, but it's not. I don't even use these words at all. But if there was ever something demonic, that's what it is. This is evil at its highest, in my opinion. So that is it, and I think as a dad watching other parents, it is, I don't even know, there is no really words, I guess, to say. Yeah, there's no words, in my opinion. It is the most awful thing. And this is what, when you asked about, what kind of keeps me around, I guess, and it's like knowing that the brown Palestinian Jesus is not okay with any of this. I think it's something that hits me way more than an intellectual thing, but
yeah.
And I think it's diabolical how, one, there is no in-between, not that there should be, but like arguing with this reporter, I was like, dude, all you're doing is repeating Israeli propaganda. I'm just saying that maybe 20,000 children shouldn't be bombed. And the most child amputees ever in history to satisfy your, revenge? We just know that it's not revenge. This is beyond revenge. This is beyond repercussions. This is beyond fighting terror, whatever that means. This is not that.
The conclusion that I fear I've come to is that the ultimate reason for the intensification after October 7th is really to preserve Benjamin Netanyahu's personal political career.
Yeah.
Because otherwise he'd be in prison. Yes. There were all sorts of trials going on. And the war has prevented those from taking place.
Yeah. Which, like I said, to me tis the highest evil.
Yeah.
I'd love to come back and talk more about all this stuff.
Yeah.
You're welcome anytime.
Anytime.
Your knowledge base for all this is you're just a guy with a high school diploma, as you said, but you're more knowledgeable than 99.9% of people that I've met. So you're well suited to come back anytime you want. I guess what I want you to know, Ike, is at least from where I sit, and I think Adam would agree, you've done what you can. You've used your gifts and your talents, I think, to protest in a way that you've sacrificed a lot to do so. So that's why we wanted you on, because I think I really look up to you for, you didn't have to speak out all these years, and you have said yourself on this podcast that if you hadn't, you'd still have a lot more gigs, a lot more opportunities, right?
Yeah.
Anything you want to add, Adam? Just
appreciate the work you do, Ike, and I've really enjoyed having this conversation with you and hearing about your journey. It's
thank you. Yeah,
it's all incredible stuff.
Same, and I appreciate you guys, and I'll say, like, I listened to your that pre-conversation. I thought, wow, I'm gonna learn a lot from you guys. So I keep doing it, and I can't wait to learn more from you guys and to sit at your feet. And So thank you for what you guys are doing, because I know this is it's also a lot. So thank you.
Yeah, we appreciate those words. Do you have anything to plug? I know you have another song that's out now, right?
Yeah, I've got, I'm releasing music, and I have another single that's out called Won't He Do It, and we're releasing a few more singles, and then I have a record that's coming out in the fall called Honest Hymns and Freedom Songs. So yeah, just pay attention. I've got stuff coming out, hopefully it'll stuff that people want to listen to. So yeah,
we'll link your pages in the description.
Dope.
And I'll close out. Thank you, Ike, for sharing your story. Your courage to speak out, even when it's cost you a lot of your platform, reminds us that faith without justice is hollow, and that silence in the face of empire can be complicity. So we appreciate that you haven't been a part of that complicity. In every lyric, in every stand you've taken, you've shown what it means to follow the Christ who flips the tables, not just prays quietly. For our listeners, whether you grew up in the church or never set foot in one, I hope that Ike's story calls us all to ask, what are we willing to risk for what's right? It was truly an honor to have you on our podcast, Ike, and we welcome you back anytime for one of our more traditional episodes. If you ever want to do a protest or revolution in history, we'd love to have you along for the ride.
Would love to.
And Adam, Ike has generously granted us permission to close out with part of his song, God in the Rubble. For the full song, for our listeners, please look up Ike Ndolo wherever you stream music. Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure potting with you this evening and morning for Adam.
Thanks so much, guys. Sleep well, mate. You've earned the rest for sure.
Thanks.
For our listeners, it's almost 3 a.m. for Ike. And to close us out, this is Ike Ndolo with God in the Rubble.
From the river to the sea, we will be free, free indeed. From the river to the sea, we will be free, free indeed. From the river to the sea, we will be free, free indeed. God is in the rubble, reaching for my hand. God is in the wreckage, helping me to stand. God is with the people who cry freedom in His land. God is in the rubble, with me to the end. I said, God is in the rubble, with me to the end.